God morgen, alle sammen. Har dere det bra? I'm going to talk about small countries with big ideas, or as they call, countries that punch above their weight. And today I'm going to talk about two countries that I care deeply about, two countries that I call home. Costa Rica, my country where I was born, 5 million people. And Norway, another country of 5 million people, the country where my husband was born, a country where I have family. And we're going to talk about our journey to be climate leaders, because we are. We're going to talk about the very difficult things that we need to tackle, because there are difficult things and we cannot not talk about them. And we're going to talk about why we have to right now think even bigger. How many of you knew before you came here that in the 90s, it was Costa Rica and Norway that pioneered something even before the Kyoto Protocol was born? Costa Rica came up with the notion of a bond, a certificate, an offset that was going to help us protect forest in private lands. So the first country that bought that certificate was Norway. And that eventually led to innovation and inspiration for the UN model for carbon offsets. I was a negotiator in the UN, and I can tell you without any hesitation that your country and my country have never been a problem. We have always tried to be constructive, and in the case of Costa Rica, in the run-up to Paris, a woman with a very big spirit, from a small country but big spirit, Christiana Figueres, who has been in Norway several times, played a very positive role as a bridge among many countries as a UN chief, a climate chief. Also, when it comes to thinking about the green economy, it was back in the 90s, think about it, that Norway had the idea of a carbon tax with very different layers for different industries, but the concept was there in the early 90s. And then in Costa Rica, we had a fuel tax for environmental purposes that was set up around 97. And of course, in the case of Costa Rica and Norway, we also know that rainforests matter. So we have created a track record. In the case of Costa Rica, we are the only tropical country that not only stopped deforestation, but we reversed it. So now we have more forest coverage than we did in the 80s. And in the case of Norway, you know very well that since 2008, around that year, you became a big champion for forest. Again, small country with a big idea. In the 90s, that's when I got engaged in these topics in my own country. There was this notion that we had to pay for ecosystem services, which now many countries do, but at the time was a very novel idea. And of course, 2008, this is before Copenhagen, before Paris. These two countries were willing to be leaders on climate and carbon neutrality, and it has been difficult. But the point is, the idea was there even before the notion that we had to have targets for Paris. So that was, in the case of Norway, 2030, in the case of Costa Rica, 2021. This is a sign of confidence and a sign that we have to be leaders. And then, I mean, this is part of the story that you know and I know. These two countries are well known for having a clean power sector. Many countries are not there yet and won't be there in the next years. They are trying to get there, but in the case of Norway and Costa Rica, our main headache is not in the power sector. In the case of Norway and Costa Rica, obviously hydro is part of the big story. In the case of Costa Rica, because we have volcanoes, we also have geothermal, and we are increasingly betting on wind. And this is also important, we have been able to achieve that with a very strong energy architecture. So WEF measures and ranks this architecture. In Norway and Costa Rica rank among the top 20 performers of the index. This is from 2017. So I suppose that most of you, if not everyone here, knows that the future is electric. We have to electrify our transportation. That's the part of the economy that is not there yet, but we know we have to do this. So think about it. Isn't that interesting that already in the 90s, Norway came up with this idea of incentives. They have been improved and they have been adjusted, but it was around the 90s that you came up with this. And I was very happy to to remember that already in 96, 97, we were also talking about promoting electric cars. Clearly not at the level of you, because you have very strong incentives, but the idea that electric cars matter was already there in Costa Rica in the 90s. There was even a rally in the mid-90s in Costa Rica. So why would we keep using oil when electricity can do the job? These are our 5 sources of, energy, of electricity, and this is the conversation we're having. We don't have to wait for other countries to clean up their electricity system in order for the world to do that. We are already having this conversation, and in the kind of activism that I do, we frame it as an identity discussion. This is not about just technology or what big countries do or where investments go, which is an important part of the conversation, but this is about who we are. It's about what choices we want to make in our country that can inspire ourselves, but also others. And we take a lot of inspiration from you. What you do matters to us and to many other countries. These are pictures from the event we held this year, getting people to touch these technologies and say, you can actually do, you have to be part of this because the electricity is clean and you can be part of this revolution. So again, this is not always easy, and I don't want to shy away from the discussion of paradoxes, because this is in the newspaper. This is an article from The Guardian. There have been many. Oh yeah, you're so green. Well, guess what? You're very dependent on oil. And I say, yes, it's true. And I'm trying to work on it. That's precisely why I work on this. So we can't shy away from this. We are totally dependent on oil, and we have to do something. And in the case of Norway, well, there is no way around avoiding this conversation. Yes, you are absolute leaders on EVs, and the story is going to get even bigger because it makes a lot of sense. But you're still betting on oil expansion. And it's a paradox. And I want to be very respectful. I don't want to come here and tell you it's wrong and what you're doing is wrong. It is a paradox. And the question that I ask myself is whether it's wise for Norway to keep thinking that the world needs oil and we need to keep investing in oil. Because maybe there is a different way to ask the question, given that you have so much going on for you when it comes to electric mobility, not just for cars, but for the rest of the transportation system. So let me give you an example. I'm so proud that my country, since 2003, banned oil exploration and exploitation in Costa Rica, because we had so much pressure from a company in Texas back in the 2000s. So this is a very popular thing that has happened over 10 years. The country has been extending the ban on extraction. And this is the picture of our president today, who extended the ban to 2021. So it was a big thing when he decided to extend it. Popular thing, especially with young people. So it was painful to watch the following, because a few months later, Statoil, again, I want to be respectful, but this was difficult for me to read in the newspapers, because that's the moment when we come to terms with the paradoxes, that the oil drilling was going to happen just in our neighborhood, because we're a small country, so Nicaragua is just around the corner. And the point here, again, is to tell you that I'm here to help. We want this to succeed. So this is an example of the things that will continue happening, especially in a decade that is deciding to be very much friendly to oceans. So this year, we decided to go even farther, and that Pacific Ocean, at least whatever we can do to protect our part of it, is basically going to happen because of this decision to do a marine protected area. So where am I going with this? This story of electrification has to be bigger. And Norway, because of the price parity that you have achieved through incentives, is already where many countries will be in many years. Again, we need your story. We brought Christina Wu, who I hope is sitting somewhere in the audience. Her presentation in Costa Rica made a huge difference in the Congress, in our own discussion on how to grow the incentives. And Bjorn Utgaard, also Norwegian, who is sitting here, he helped us a lot with our own pathway for Costa Rica, and also showed how many advantages Costa Rica had, because the distances are shorter, our winters are non-existent, as you can imagine, and every house pretty much has a garage, so we can charge very easily. Quick point, it doesn't make sense to go to beautiful, pristine places in nature with big fossil fuel cars, with big exhaust pipes. It just doesn't make sense. So we really have to innovate when it comes to electrification of transportation for tourism. And again, I don't have enough time, but if I had, I would tell you this story, because this story happened this month in my country. And it was a very tough reminder of how vulnerable we are, how much is at stake. And this is just an example of a high school that had been built 2 years before and was totally destroyed in 2 days. But I don't want to be tragic. Our country never victimizes itself. So I don't want to be tragic, because what came out of this was the notion that we are going to be strong. We are going to be strong. And that's where I wanted to finish this presentation. Now more than ever, this is the time to think big. This is the time to do at least 3 things. First, we have to electrify everything. We really have to punch above our weight and say, we're going to show that this is doable. And again, and Marius presented, the minister said it, it's not just about cars, it's about everything else. Tourism is also a revolution that is waiting to happen. Second, innovation. I think Brian made also a very important point. You know, we need innovation around the world, and these 2 countries can deliver a lot. In the case of Norway, e-shipping and e-flights are super exciting things that you could do for the world, and we are willing to support you and do whatever we can to do other prototypes in our countries. And of course, anything related to resource efficiency, to being smart with resources, being smart in the decisions and creating jobs and be prosperous with the kind of development and economic growth that is worth having. Of course, we're going to be your partner. And finally, it's not just about clean growth, it's about de-risking that growth strategy. So impacts from climate change, impacts from markets that are evolving faster than we imagined. That is the other conversation. I know you have created a commission that is dealing with these risks, so congratulations, that is the right step. So let me finish by saying that being small doesn't mean thinking small. Always remember that. Small countries cannot and should not think that we have to stick to the last part of the game. We can be leaders. And in the case of Costa Rica and Norway, we have been leaders, and now is the time to sustain this leadership and be more inspirational than ever, even though we have big paradoxes to solve. Thank you very much.